ladies and gentlemen, it's Rei-Lin, and I'm back with some more Armored Warfare content. Some big changes are coming out for Armored Warfare in the near future, and I definitely wanted to let you all know about it. They're calling it the Balance 2.0 patch, or patch 0.19, and there are some significant changes to the game coming about. They're almost starting from scratch, if I wanted to be quite honest with you, and that's kind of what they're looking forward to, seeing everyone's feedback, and just basically it's just a complete overhaul from tier 1 to tier 10 through all the game modes, PvP and PvE. It's a lot to talk about, and I'm just going to paraphrase some of the uh, biggest changes and give you guys and gals some idea of exactly what is happening to the game, and if it's still going to be worth your time, or if you've already left the game and went back to World of Tanks, maybe this will bring some people back from World of Tanks, or steal some people from World of Tanks if they've never played Armored Warfare. So let's start with kind of some of the basic problems with Armored Warfare in general that most people just couldn't hang with. There were problems with the balance in high tier games. So basically above tier 6, you started to get to the point where in PvP, a lot of the gameplay just wasn't very fun. And I think a lot of that still is embedded with the idea that World of Tanks kind of came out first and sort of set the standard for how, a heavy tank should be, and how a medium tank should be, and how a light tank should play. And so bringing some of that knowledge to Armored Warfare was useful, don't get me wrong. But because the core mechanics weren't exactly the same, I think a lot of people started to get frustrated that main battle tanks were basically ruling the battlefield up until, say, one flank would fall, and then they were just completely useless because, in Armored Warfare, a main battle tank is effective mainly from the front. And so they're armored very well in the front and not very well on the sides of the rear. They're not very mobile. They're very open to getting their asses kicked once people can start flanking them. And in general, I think the maps were sort of not really balanced in a lot of ways. The PvE was also a problem because there's not that much difficulty in the bots. You can get overran if you're in, like, say, a light tank or a lightly armored vehicle, but for the most part, if you just pick a really heavily armored main battle tank, you can do any difficulty and pretty much clean house. So there was those kind of gameplay problems. Of course, artillery was still a problem for a lot of people. They hate artillery, even in Armored Warfare, even though they've tried to balance it. Even though in a lot of ways, I think it's much better in Armored Warfare than in World of Tanks for sure. But these little hitches and problems with not having that many tanks to unlock, and it just had some weird problems that a lot of people just really hated about the game. And especially with the PvP side of things, it's mainly the same as World of Tanks. It's 15 on 15. There really aren't that many game modes. The newest thing with global operations kind of brought some PvE and PvP together into one giant battlefield. And it helped. It's interesting. It's neat. But it's still not polished. It still needs a lot of work. And so what Obsidian have done is basically said, okay, let's go and we're going to take all the gripes and we're going to try to fix as much as we can. And we're going to start at tier 1 and go all the way through the entire game. And they're essentially changing almost everything. So let's give you a small taste of what this is. Like, for example, they've got an article on their website where they're explaining pretty much everything they're going to be messing with. And I'll leave that down below the video for you, a link to all of the sections that they talk about, and they talk quite a bit about many things. So I don't want to go in and just read you line for line, but I'll give you kind of the gist of things. For example, like gun scaling and damage scaling, penetration scaling. You're used to this. You have a tier 1 vehicle and a gun, and it has so much accuracy and it does so much damage per shot. And then you go up to tier 2, and that same gun suddenly does a little bit more damage, has a little bit more pen. And then you go up to tier 3 or 4. As you keep scaling up, damage keeps scaling up, penetration keeps scaling up. And so it just kind of snowballs to the point where by the time you get to like tier 9 or 10, you're almost 2 or 3 shotting any tank you're firing at, because you do so much damage and you have so much penetration that it's literally, unless you're a main battle tank, you're not going to be able to bounce shots, you're not going to be able to juke things, you're just going to die very, very quickly. And because the maps are so open and you don't have a limit on how far you can see or how far you can shoot, just getting spotted out in the open is a much bigger deal in Armored Warfare than it is in, say, World of Tanks, where there's a render distance that protects you from being fired upon by the other half of the enemy team from all the way across the map. That's not the case in Armored Warfare, and so the damage that you take is astronomically going up as you go up through the tiers. So now what they're going to be doing is essentially the damage that you can do with a tank depends on the caliber of the gun. So, for example, if you have a 105mm armor-piercing shot from a Tier 3 tank, like, say, the Leopard, and it does 263 damage per shot, while 105 from a Tier 8 deals 554 damage per shot. So, as you can see, the power creep starts coming in, and now, okay, the same gun just moved up a few tiers, is doing way more damage. Well, basically what they're going to do is they're going to kind of go in between those two extremes. They're basically going to say, okay, if it's 105mm, instead of doing 263 at Tier 3 and 554 at Tier 8, we're going to say it's going to do 420 damage no matter what tier it's at, but the higher tier is going to get much better penetration to reflect the technology difference between a Tier 3 and a Tier 8, because we're kind of going through history from the lower tiers being tanks than from the 50s, 60s, and 70s to more of the right now modern day 2015, 16 tanks at Tier 10. So that's what basically they're going to do. They're basically going to just say, okay, if it's this caliber of gun, it's going to do a set amount of damage regardless of the tier, but the higher tiers will have more shell velocity, so it'll be a little bit more accurate, and it'll have a higher base penetration rate. So you're definitely going to want to have it, and it's definitely going to be a much better gun on a higher tier than on a lower tier. So that's kind of what they're trying to do, is to balance out the damage across all the tiers. Like, for example, a T64 versus a T80, for example. The T80 is just going to two-shot the T64. The T64 is not going to really go through the T80. And so you meet each other on the battlefield. The T64 is just toast. And I know that's kind of like a hyper thing there, because that's essentially 3 tiers above. But, I mean, these situations come up all the time, even in World of Tanks. If you're 2 tiers under whatever you're fighting, generally you're not going to be able to win. Because the damage is so much higher on that higher tier than what you can put out, that it's laughable in a lot of cases. So that's what they're hoping that will help to even out the damage spiking, and basically say, well, even though that guy is 2 tiers lower than this guy, if he plays well and he plays better and he's good at angling his tank and making sure that the enemy tank can't get effective shots on him while he gets effective shots on them, he'll pretty much be able to win. So skill is going to be brought, I think, much more in line with the balances for this. So that's what I'm hoping. That's what their goal is on all of this stuff. So essentially they're going through and, it's like I said, overhauling everything, even the ammunition and the armor interaction, with, you know, different types of ammunition having very different effects and advantages and disadvantages based on what kind of ammunition you're firing, whether it's armor piercing, high explosive anti-tank or heat, or HESH or high explosive squash head, or just high explosive in general. And all of these things are going to have a bonus attached to the shell type. For example, high explosive will do 25% more damage if it fully penetrates. It has a 25% chance to start a fire, or 50% chance if they hit the fuel tanks, and it doesn't have to penetrate in order to deal damage. But it has a lot of disadvantages, you know, based on the fact that, you know, if it hits at a bad angle, it may not go off. If it hits armor that's 100 millimeters or thicker, it's probably going to do little or no damage. It's less accurate than heat ammo is. It has a much lower shell velocity. Things like that. All of these things are kind of being accounted for all the different types of ammo. And you're pretty much going to have to start knowing the kind of ammo and versus the kind of thing you're shooting at, so that you can take advantage of, okay, armor piercing gains this much of a bonus because he doesn't have more than such and such amount of armor. So this is going to be much more effective than if I use just here, I'm just going to shoot heat at the guy. So there is those kind of things that you will eventually start to have to take into consideration to be as effective as possible on the battlefield. A lot of armor changes are coming along, mainly with the armor. They're essentially making certain tanks have less accuracy, but the accuracy is going to start going up much faster through the tiers, so the higher tier vehicles are, reflecting the technological advances of history, and they do get a little bit more accurate as time goes on, and the tiers get higher. Even they've added some missile noise, they call it, to anti-guided missiles, so that you can't just pinpoint accurate fly a missile straight into your initial point of where you're trying to get the missile to go. It's going to have some variation. It's going to have a little bit of wobble to it as the missile travels, and then as the tiers go up, those missile systems get more and more advanced to the point where you're pretty much going to pinpoint a place on the tank and fly the missile straight into it. A lot of the armor values, are going to change too. They're adding more places for the armor effectiveness to be. So like a model of a tank might have right now 6 different armor thickness values on its turret. After the patch, they're going to have up to, say, 14 armor thickness values across the turret, so that they can just basically, you can find weak points without them being artificially inserted, like with a commander hatch or a lower front plate. A lot of the tanks in Armor Warfare don't have accurate armor because they're trying to make the game work with the kind of penetration values and damage that they do. So they've had to change things that are no longer historically accurate. And now, using all these different zones and changing a lot of the models and the armor thicknesses to better match exactly how these tanks perform in real life, they're also going to make it a lot more dynamic on the gameplay, and they don't have to have these artificial weak points on main battle tanks or any other tank that has any kind of armor. So right now, it's kind of whacked out. They're hoping that this will obviously change quite a bit of the gameplay, so that you'll be aiming for weak points that would make sense on a tank, as opposed to just firing at lower front plates or only trying to hit the sides or rear of a tank. So that's another change that's coming. Vehicle mobility, they're going to be hitting that up. Basically, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, there's essentially 2 kinds of tanks in the game. There's wheeled tanks and there's main battle tanks that are tracked vehicles. So right now, everyone kind of does sort of the same on all terrain. You get your crew skills, and that improves on off-road and things like that. But basically what they're going to do is they're going to make main battle tanks get to their top speed a little bit quicker, but not turn quite as good, because they want people in light tanks, especially, or AFVs or faster vehicles, to be able to kind of circle strafe if they've put themselves in the position of, well, I'm going to be point blank, I'm going to die if this fails, but at least they have the speed and the turning radius to take down a main battle tank if they can circle strafe them. So some of that is going to be put back into the game, and a lot of the terrain will now make a huge difference. Tracked vehicles do very well off-road. They're going to do worse on flat paved surfaces, whereas wheeled vehicles will do really well on paved roads and surfaces that are not off-road, but they'll go slower because that's the nature of wheels on soft terrain, so mud and all of that going through water. The wheeled vehicles won't be quite as maneuverable off-road as they will be on-road. And light tanks and tracked AFVs, both of those things will have the best off-road performance in the game because they need to be fast, they need to be very mobile, but they won't have the highest top speed compared to wheeled vehicles that are on a hard road or surface that is not considered off-road. So essentially they're just trying to make it overall that everyone has some advantage depending especially on the class of vehicle. Before, it was just kind of like all over the place. Some tracked vehicles went really well no matter what they did, and some wheeled vehicles didn't go as fast or whatever as you would assume that they should, especially considering their stats. So hopefully that will help out. Another thing they're going to be doing is just like in World of Tanks. For people that don't know, it's one of the core mechanics of World of Tanks, especially against a tank destroyer that doesn't have a turret, is to track somebody. If you can track a tank destroyer without a turret and he can't turn to face you, you're pretty much going to win that one-on-one battle. So you do that by shooting the front or rear sprockets of the tracks. You can blow those off because they have a health pool separate from the main tank itself, and if you knock the tracks off, they can't move for a few seconds. This does happen in Armored Warfare, but it's not nearly as consistent. So one of the things they're going to be doing is making it to where you can detrack somebody much easier and use that as a strategic element for moving in and making sure that your team can destroy a high value target, or just so that you can get to safety without getting the crap blown out of you because you've immobilized somebody that was chasing you. So essentially they're changing the hit points and making it much more obvious that you can shoot those drive wheels on the front and the back of especially tracked vehicles to detract them. They're also changing so that the wheeled vehicles, if there are multiple wheeled vehicles, usually these are tank destroyers that have 6 or 8 wheels, if any 3 wheels are blown out and go flat, they will become immobilized, and it's going to take a little bit longer to put the tracks back on and repair the wheels than it would be any other part of the tank. So if you get tracked and you don't have a repair kit to instantly get that stuff back up, especially if you're out in the open, you're probably going to die. So it's going to make a lot more sense, I think, that you can use tracking as a very effective means for getting out of trouble or making sure that you're putting an enemy in dire straits and getting somebody that's doing really well to get their asses kicked right out in the open. So a lot of that's going to change. Smoke is going to change, smoke mechanics. It's going to be very important for moving across the battlefield. They're changing some the APS systems so that anti-guided missiles are not nearly as well, they're going to be more effective actually, because what they're doing with the APS is they're making it sort of a conal arc, and some only work against missiles fired from a certain distance. And so, again, it's not going to be a fail-safe for everybody that has APS. You're not just going to sit there and the game's just going to blow up missiles for you. So, again, you're going to have to know where missiles are coming from. You're going to have to be aware of where they can come from. You're going to be turning your turrets because the APS is going to start working more in a frontal cone than just a 360 ball around your tank. So some tanks will still have that, and some tanks will have multiple APS charges, but most of them are all still going to have charges and a cooldown associated with it. So again, your missiles are going to be a lot more effective against people that have APS and don't know what they're doing. So again, it's just going to add a little bit more to the challenge, I think, and be a lot more interesting overall. Another major change is artillery, and for some people, I think everyone's gonna be not really overjoyed to see artillery go away, but they had a choice. They could have completely removed artillery from the game, or they could have struck a balance and tried to make artillery more interesting than what it is. As it is in Armored Warfare, they're slow, they're somewhat accurate, but they don't do that much damage. They're more of an annoyance factor. But even at the higher tiers, they're less of an annoyance and more of an actual threat, especially because of how much module damage they can do to your tank, and the fact that you're essentially unable to retaliate against artillery, especially if your team doesn't have any artillery. You're just a sitting duck, and they can just pepper you all day long, and maybe the shots are only doing 200 to 400 damage per shell, and there might be a 15-second gap, but let's say you're in a position where nothing else can really hit you. But artillery, he's still going to eventually kill you, and you're not going to be able to do much of anything against them because you can't see them. They're across the map. So instead of completely removing the artillery, what they're going to do is essentially put one artillery line in the game. Just flat out, they're just going to have a self-propelled gun line that's not going down multiple tiers, not going down multiple dealers. And essentially what they're doing as this first iteration is that they're going to give them a high damage and longer load times. And aim times and things like that. They're not going to be nearly as accurate. So in a way, it sounds like they're trying to go a little bit towards the World of Tanks idea, except that they're going to make these guns actually very mobile. They're going to make them the way they are in real life. They're very mobile in real life, so they're going to be very mobile now. And so they're no longer going to have like the artillery view, so no longer the exact same thing. They're going to have a standard zoom, which sounds like every other tank. They're going to retain smoke shells. They're getting rid of the illumination support shells. And it's just basically going to really change how artillery is playing in Armored Warfare. They're not 100% going to keep it like this. If people don't like it, they're going to change it. If they have to remove it, they're perfectly fine with taking it completely out of the game. But for now, they want to try a few different things. Things that I wish World of Tanks had been doing here for years. But they're going to start doing this a little bit at a time. If this iteration sucks and everyone hates it, they'll try something else. They might try 2, 3, or 4 times to come to some sort of balance with artillery. And if they can't get it, boom, it'll just be gone, and they'll replace it with something that's even more interesting. But as things are right now, most of the artillery is going away, and it's going to be replaced by just some guns that are very mobile and do a lot of damage with long reloads. So it's more or less a sniper is what you're coming in with. And so we'll see how it works. Well, that's what it's going to come down to. And the final thing that I want to talk about here is that they're adding a ton of new tanks. They're moving tanks around through the tiers, and they're adding a lot of tanks to the game. From tier 1 all the way up through tier 10. To kind of fill in the gaps from tanks that they're going to remove or they're going to change. And they're just adding a lot more variety of tanks, especially at the low tiers. Like, for example, at tier 2, they're adding the T-55. The improved version of the T-54 will now be at tier 2. The T-72, the basic Ural, was moved from tier 5, so now it's tier 4. But now you have the T-72 Alpha. It's moved, and so now you have that. You have the T-64 BV. It's a semi-placeholder. The spot will be shared with the T-72 Bravo. And so, there you got that. You got the T-90. It's going to be split. At tier 8, you're going to have the T-90A. At the tier 9, you're going to have the T-90 MS. So you got a couple of T-90s now. So you're going to have a lot of new stuff coming in. Now, most of this stuff is obviously Russian because Russia had a T-64A, they had the T-80, T-80B, T-80U. So all of these things will now be represented and just kind of flesh out mainly the Russian tanks. But that's not all. They're adding tons of stuff, even with Western main battle tanks. They got the Chieftain in Mark II, Chieftain Mark V, the Chieftain 800/900, an experimental Chieftain. You got tier 7 to 10 branch, the Challenger 1, the Ariete, Challenger 2, and the ATDU. They're mainly unchanged, but what they want to do is they want to move the Ariete to a different location and put in the Vickers Mark 7. So you have that. Light tanks are getting several new tanks, the Scimitar, the Scorpion 90. You're going to have the Sheridan. The Sheridan's kind of going to go up a tier and become a little bit more balanced. And my favorite, the Bago Panzer 57, it's going to stay as an alternative to the Sheridan. Like the XM8, it's going to be renamed to the M8 Buford. And it's because the XM8 was not, it wasn't a direct prototype of the M8 Thunderbolt. So they're changing the name around a little bit. Armored fighting vehicles, they're just basically moving things around. You're going to have the BMD 1P, which has a rocket launcher on it. It's a variation of that. The BMD 2M, it basically is a BMD 2, but they added more firepower and things like that. So a lot of this stuff is changing. Everyone, even Sophie, is getting some changes. Where they'll say the Walker Bulldog is going from tier 2 to tier 1. They're putting in some light tanks. They're adding the different variation of the M60, and all of these things that you're going to be able to read about if you click the link in the description down below. Just I don't want to go through every single tank that they're adding, but they are adding a whole hell of a lot of tanks, even adding a few to the Chinese dealer. So essentially, this game is almost going to become a completely new beast from what we are playing right now. And that's a good thing, because there's nothing wrong with having all of this new stuff coming out and becoming sort of a new game, because a lot of what's in the game now, everyone's kind of picked it over. They've seen the PvE, it's kind of meh. They've done the PvP, it's kind of meh. They saw global operations, it's kind of okay, but it's still kind of meh. And all of these things are stemming from the fact that a lot of the tanks are not world accurate. A lot of the penetration values don't work right. There's still a few bugs here and there with the armor. So overall, people wanted some more dynamic gameplay. It's essentially you just take a main battle tank, sit in front of everybody, and they can't die. They can't take damage. They're just these armored bunkers that no one can get through until one or the other of a flank drops. And once that happens, then they just die and everyone cleans up. So a lot of these matches, especially in PvP, become just runaway trains, and everyone doesn't really like that style of gameplay. I mean, those things happen even in World of Tanks, but it's a little bit rarer that you just kind of get stomped 15-1. So at the end of the day, they finally have decided, look, we're just going to start from scratch. We're going to start at tier 1. We're going to just overhaul the damn game and do things the way it sounds like a lot of people have been requesting now for pretty much since the game has come out. Even from beta. It's like, let's just go back and take a look at what we can do, because obviously what we're doing right now isn't nearly as fun as it could be, and we could do a lot better. So even the maps are going to change now, with artillery changing around. A lot of the maps were built around needing artillery to have firing lines, for example. So having big mountains and giant trees in the way and cool looking buildings and all this kind of construction stuff, they didn't have an option to do that, because then artillery couldn't fire on anybody. So now that the artillery is going to become a slightly different beast, I think the maps are going to open up. There are going to be new avenues of attack, retreat, flanking is going to be more important. Some of the view range stuff is going to change, obviously. Skills with the crew and all of these changes are going to kind of come about to make the gameplay a little bit more fluid and make a little bit more sense across all of the tiers, so that you're not getting these huge power creeping jumps from tier to tier. I mean, I think that in and of itself, just balancing the damage and having the higher tiers just do more penetration and have faster shell velocity, thus their accuracy be up a little more, is going to end up being, I think, really healthy for the game. I think it's going to start balancing things at the higher tiers, which is what a lot of people have been crying about for a while now, especially in PvP. They haven't mentioned anything new necessarily about adding more difficult modes for PvE, or even different modes at all in PvE for right now. But considering all of these changes, and you go through and if you read all of the sections, line by line from the description down below, you'll see that there is so much going to happen to the game that they literally are asking for your support and not giving up on the game and just treating this as a fresh start, and they're going to start completely over, and they hope that everyone will have a much better experience this time around. Now, they do stress that all of this stuff is going to be subject to change, but they're definitely not going to just leave you out in the cold. Any premium tanks, if they remove them from the game or take them and put them somewhere else, you will be compensated. There are a few tanks that are going to go away that right now are premium tanks, but were premium tanks from either a founder pack or from some other place that's not necessarily from the dealer tree, like an event or something like that. It's just because they want to either implement that tank somewhere else in the tree further down the line after they balance it, or put it back as a premium tank later on. So overall, no one's going to get screwed. They're going to keep track of all the reputation you've spent, all the credits you have, the gold you have. They're going to make sure that everyone is compensated if anything changes to the point where somebody feels like they're getting screwed over somehow. Well, I bought this tank and now it doesn't play anything like why I bought the tank. You will be compensated. They're going to make sure to take care of us. And I think overall that's definitely going to be a huge improvement to the game. These are humongous sweeping changes. This isn't going to happen overnight, and just the drasticness of all these changes might bring about all new problems that they can't foresee. I mean, I can see all new bugs creeping in there, especially if they're changing the models of all the tanks and changing the damage ratios and values of all the guns. I can see a lot of new bugs creeping in, but hopefully the core of the game itself, the gameplay, will improve quite a bit and bring a lot of new people, and maybe bring back a lot of people that have kind of either given up on the game or just went back to World of Tanks because, hey, it's World of Tanks, it's been around, I might as well go back. It's kind of like World of Warcraft for tanks. So overall, I think these changes are going to be a huge boost to the game. I think after they've done all of this stuff and they see that everything gets balanced, we're going to start seeing all the new maps. We're going to see tons of new stuff for PvE. We're going to have a lot of new maps for global operations, and everything is just going to start exploding from there. As long as they get it right this time, because I don't think that anybody's going to want to stick around if they have to do a balanced 3.0 and then start over again. So hopefully these changes are going to become the standard. This is what Armor Warfare really was supposed to be. We're sorry we messed up the first time. We thought we had something good. You disagreed. So now we're going to take it and rechange it. We're going to sweep over the whole game and put it exactly how you guys want to see it. So at the end of the day, I think that it's going to be a very positive thing for the game, and I look forward to seeing it. They have not given any kind of announcement date on when this is going to go, but considering as much as they have to do, I would assume sometime after the first of the year for sure. Anyway, that's just going to do it for this video. I wanted to let you guys in on this. I know a lot of people probably don't keep up on much of Armored Warfare news unless they're diehard crazy like me. I'm going to be doing a short video here about the shark tanks soon, and I'm going to be doing a little kind of review on a normal tank, one of the leopards, the one A5. Somebody asked, they wanted to know something about it, so I'll probably be doing that soon. So if you enjoy the video, if you got some information out of it, please press the like button down below. It does help out the channel. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe to my channel, you can click down at the bottom of your screen right now, and that'll get you all the latest updates when I go live with a new video. Anyway, that's going to do it. Take care, and I'll talk to you all next time.